Welcome to Oral Histories Live at the History Center. Tonight, thank you for coming for our rescheduled event. We want to especially thank our sponsors, Mike and Esther Wilson. Thank you so much. Round of applause. And you are here at the historic 4th installment of Oral Histories Live. We have our first guest is here tonight, George Henry. We had him last year. Thank you. Good to see you, George. And you keep coming back to the History Center. My name is Mark Stouffer Hunter, historian here at the History Center. Again, I welcome all of you. We're looking forward to a really great evening with our special guest, John Campbell. And without further ado, the program will be about an hour. We'll have some questions. We'll have a little bit of time towards the end for some questions. And without much further ado than that, I want to introduce our host for the evening, or MC, Mr. Rob Klein.
Thank you, Mark. You know, this is the second Klein presentation that George Henry will hear today. He listened to my daughter Emily speak at the Optimist Club today. I'll just tell you ahead of time that she was better than I am going to. All right, but it is my pleasure to share one of the most delightful and engaging personalities in Linn County with you tonight. John is also here. Yeah. And we're going to jump in. I should tell you, because I'm so delighted to be able to share this piece of information, John Campbell was a history major. And so for all of you who feel as though you need to advise the young people in your lives to avoid the liberal arts, look at John. It turned out fine. It turned out just fine. All right, so let's start at the beginning. Let's start in I know this isn't the beginning of your career. Let's start at the beginning of your career here in Cedar Rapids in 1979, 40 years ago, this year. You arrive at a good moment, particularly in terms of Hawkeye athletics. Talk a little bit about that.
I was very fortunate. Actually, I started in 1970. Is that what it says? Moved here from Green Bay, Wisconsin in 1970. And the greatest thing about it was that Hayden Fry had just become the Iowa football coach. So we all know what happened to Iowa sports when Hayden arrived. There's a boom like that. And he was a great guy to cover. The Hawkeyes were going great guns. Dan Gable was coaching wrestling, right? Well, we knew that was going to happen, didn't we?
Yep, you're good.
The trouble is he's never been mic'd up before, so it's been very, very challenging.
So like I say, you know, it was just great timing to get here when Hayden got here because, you know, what great things he did at the University of Iowa. He was a colorful character. And then you have, like I said, Dan Gable on top of that. Lute Olson was still here. And when I first arrived, I arrived in July of 70. I mean, you're right, 79. Yeah, Green Bay was 70. Rob Klein never makes a mistake. See?
This is what they pay me the mediocre dollars for.
Yeah. I told Martin my memory's not always the best. But yeah, so I arrived here in 79, and in March of 80, I covered Iowa in the Final Four down in Indianapolis. And I'm thinking, man, this is going to be great. We're going to be covering Final Fours all the time with Iowa basketball. Last time they've been there. But I genuinely think that the 1980s were the golden age of University of Iowa sports. The way things took off, and Vivian Stringer arrived, and it was a great time, and you know, ESPN wasn't around then, so
right.
We were kind of the big dogs in town. Not Channel 9 wasn't necessarily the big dog in town at that time, but we were the TV source for people. You didn't have all these other channels, and of course that has changed drastically over the years.
Absolutely, and I want to talk about technology changes, but first I want to talk about 1982 and a first for the area, a satellite broadcast, the first for KCRG. Where were you and what were you doing?
Well, we were down in Atlanta. Iowa was at the Peach Bowl to play Tennessee, and WSB was the ABC affiliate there, and they had a satellite uplink. And we had never done a live satellite telecast of any kind for Channel 9 until that point. And we made arrangements, and we went into their studio. And when they got done with their newscast, they put me on the set and put a microphone on me, and and we did a live shot back to the station. So that was kind of groundbreaking. I know it's just, you know, everyday stuff now, but back then that was pretty special to have a live report going up.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing about technology, right? The first time it seems magical, and then someone in 2019 asks you to send them a fax.
Yes.
But the fact that we were in a bowl game again in
Yes.
'82, and that there was new technology on the side at the time, it's an exciting time to be covering the sports.
It was indeed. I can still hear Hayden after the game saying, "We were embarrassed at the Rose Bowl. We are no longer embarrassed." Hayden was a great guy to cover.
I had no idea impressions were part of the program. We'll ask for his C. Vivian Stringer in a moment. All right. Well, since we've been talking about technology, let's talk about the tech changes from your time in, I think we've agreed, 1970 in Green Bay, 1979 here in Cedar Rapids, and over the course of your career, what kind of technology changes have you seen?
They've just been tremendous. I mean, when I started in Green Bay, we were on film. We shot everything on film, and so you had to wait to have it processed before you could work with it and everything. And then in the late 70s, when we were still in Green Bay, we started getting these ENG cameras, or video cameras that shot tape. And so there was a transition period there. And when I arrived in KCRG in 1979, we still had some film, which I enjoyed. It was lightweight, it was easy to work with, and I felt good with it. But we also had these video cameras, and the great thing about them was they shot tape. And with tape, when you got back to the station, you just pulled the tape out and you were editing. I mean, you could see what you'd shot already. And when you shot film, you might get back to the station at 2 o'clock, and they weren't going to process it till 3 o'clock, and that comes out at 4 o'clock. And all of a sudden, you know, you've lost a lot of time, and you couldn't change anything. Once you ripped a piece of film and put the glue on it and everything, you were pretty much stuck with that situation. So the videotape was a big breakthrough. But those early cameras, they were called TK-76s. You may remember seeing them. They're kind of big blue monsters, and they're flat on the bottom, and they were not real handy. And then you had this big tape deck that you carried on your hip, right? You carried that on your hip, and you had 2 cables, an audio cable and a video cable.
It was the 80s, right? Huh? It was the 80s. We all carried boom boxes around.
Yeah. And but the videotape was great. The video was good. It was very cold because it was like you were right there, as opposed to film, which kind of has a warm feeling to it. And then what else? And then we started being able to have the ability to have quote unquote live shots. Mm-hmm. We had vans, and if you got to a high enough point or were close enough to the station, you could do a live shot, you know, out in the field, and there would be a signal going. In some places it was easy to do. In some places it was not easy to do. When we wanted to do Hawkeye basketball from the field house, it meant climbing up on top of the building. And we had a thing called a short hop, and you had to come up in the building every time you wanted to do this and walk across the top of the old field house, and there was a ladder you had to go up to get it to another level. And you know, it was usually about 20 below and stuff like that. So that was one area. And now you had to have your live van. We had an engineer who would sit out on the 17th tee at Finkbine Golf Course. So the signal would go up to the short hop, across to the live truck way out on the 17th tee, and then up to Channel 9. And that's how we did things. So it took some innovation and a lot of work. And then, the satellite trucks came along later on, and that made things, you could go anywhere you wanted to and get a satellite shot out and get it. But it was complicated. It was complicated. You had to reserve satellite time. You had to, and it was expensive, very expensive at the time. And so, but that increased what we could do. We could go to the Big Ten tournament in Chicago and easily send our reports back, have live shots right outside the United Center and things like that. Another thing that really helped us was we got a portable editor, so we were able to edit right on the scene. Beforehand, sometimes we had to send stuff back just shot by shot, and they would edit it back at the station. So that increased the difficulty of the projects and everything. And let's see, so now the satellite truck's not a big deal anymore because now we have these little things that are about this size that the reporters go out with and the cameramen, and they work on cell phone technology. That's what they tell me. I have no idea. And they can do live shots from anywhere. Once in a while you get in trouble like when you go on RAGBRAI and there's thousands and thousands of extra phones in the area. Then that cell phone technology sometimes doesn't help you out quite as much. But the technology has just grown by leaps and bounds, and of course now the social media is part of that technology too. And that's something that I am not involved in any way, shape, or form. One reason I decided to retire, just, it's kind of beyond me at that point.
So we can't follow you, we can't even hear us.
Technology.
Yes. That's our show. Hello? Yes, okay. So we can't follow you on Twitter?
Negative.
Can't find your Facebook page?
Negative.
It's amazing that anyone's here at all. So I've been thinking about the technology. Maybe you can solve this ongoing mystery to me. You're watching the KCRG TV 9 News, as I'm sure you all do, and Bruce and Beth say, and we're going live to John Campbell. And then there's this pause while John looks at the camera. What is happening in that pause?
That's a satellite delay shot. There's a delay, and there's nothing you can do about it. Is there anything you can do about that, Terry? I don't think so. No. And I find it. When I'm sitting at home, I find it. Just come on, let's talk. I try to tell the people down there, why do we do live shots when we don't have to do live shots? If we could have done those stand-ups and reports early on, because to me, this is just personal, the delay almost distracts from what that reporter is going to say next, because I'm just, come on. But it's technical, and it has the people in the control room can't change it, the people in the field can't change it. That's just the way it is. But it also keeps you from, in a lot of cases, doing a live VO. And I'm thinking of Friday Night Lights, when we used to be out at ball games and we'd do a live shot, and they would roll the highlights back at the station, and then you'd look at them on your monitor and you'd just call them when you're out in the field. You can't do that anymore. You have to put your voice track on that piece of tape before you send it back to the station to have it played back on the air. So that's very time consuming, and that's tricky.
So when they send Forrest out onto 3rd Street to show us that it's snowing,
yes,
there's nothing they can do about the delay.
No, well, there shouldn't be a delay on that shot.
Because it's so close.
There shouldn't be a delay on that shot. I got to tell you a story. One time the phone rang in the sports office, and I picked it up, and it was, this is Mary. I'm the news editor up at the Decorah newspaper. And I said, hi, Mary, how are things going up there? Well, she says, I probably shouldn't do this, but we've been noticing this TV9 car driving around Decorah for a couple of hours. Are we missing anything? I said,
what an opportunity.
I said, Mary, I think it's called snow. I think it was the first snow of the season, and we sent somebody all the way to Decorah to shoot video of the snow. So she laughed at that, yeah. You ever remember the old Saturday Night Live routine? It was called Live 10 Feet Away.
Oh, yeah.
We do some of that, I think, in the business now. Live 10 feet away.
All right. So I want to talk about high school coverage.
Okay.
In part because I've been thinking about it. My son, who's a student at Wichita State, he has this routine he does about the way professional athletes are interviewed. Mm-hmm. So how'd you feel about tonight's game? Well, my teammates were really there for me, and we take it one game at a time, and we'll just be back to play again tomorrow. We're baseball fans, so they play every day. Yeah. High school athletes don't respond like that. They haven't been trained to do that yet, many of them, right? So I'm interested in what it's like to try, I assume sometimes to sort of pry answers out of high school athletes, and other times to try to rein high school athletes in. And the ways in which high school coverage is a difference maker for KCRG.
Well, let's start there. High school coverage is very, very important to us. I mean, it's the one thing that ESPN isn't going to do, right? It's the one thing they're not going to do. They're not going to be out here to see Centerpoint Urbana play Dyke New Hartford or something like that. So we feel that that's one of our backbones at the station for sports is high school coverage, and we have 9.2 now. We do live games. That's a pretty neat deal. Friday Night Lights has has been a big part of what we do at Channel 9, especially in the fall. I think football, it's always, it's the start of the school season, and it's still big. I don't think it's as big as it was, but I think it's still big, and we still take great pride. And we started out with Friday Night Lights. It used to be about a 12-minute show, and now it's a half-hour show that Scott Sable and the guys do, and it's a show that just comes together right now. I mean, you don't work at it 3 days in advance or a week in advance. And Terry Jo Walter, who's sitting back here, has been the director for us on that show, and she does a great job, because I'm telling you, that show, you do it on the seat of your pants a lot, and it's on the fly, and she does a great job.
And here, I just figured she was here to make sure that John didn't make news tonight. I still feel as though no one can hear me.
Well, I'll talk while your mic's dead.
Okay.
I arranged it that way. You talked about, I just think, the essence of sports is still fairly pure at the high school level. And they haven't been coached how to answer questions. And they haven't, they're not afraid of what's going to be out there in the bulletin board material, so to speak. And so I think a lot of them are pretty good. And a lot of the times is we get to catch them right after the game. You go to college now, and gee, many Christmas, it's a half an hour, 45 minutes after the game before you can talk to them. All the emotion is gone. All the emotion is gone from the kids, and I think it takes away from it a lot. I was just over at the girls' state basketball tournament yesterday and covering that. And one of the things I like about them is they bring the coaches and the girls into a room, and you just talk to them. And this is 7 minutes after the game, so the emotions are still pretty raw at that point. Now the Boys Association has decided to go a different route. They've got the big desk up here with the microphones, and they're sitting up there, and these mics are usually about right here in the guy's face, which I've never figured out. And so a lot of the emotions out of it at that time. But the kids are sharp, and and I think they give honest answers. But I like emotion, and we try to stress that with a lot of video that we show at ball games. Show the fans' emotions, show the kids' emotions, and but give them some space too. I mean, there are appropriate times to have that camera and microphone in place, and sometimes it's not appropriate.
Sure. So speaking of the state, listen, there I am. Listen to the, I apologize, the state basketball tournament,
yes.
And your story that aired last night on the history of girls basketball in Iowa and 6-on-6 basketball. I've always thought 6-on-6 basketball was a brilliant idea because I don't want to run. I just want to play defense, and I don't want to run. But it got me thinking about the changes, not just obviously changing from 6-on-6 to 5-on-5 is a big change, but there have been changes in lots of sports over the time you've been covering them, I would think. Rule changes and division changes and all kinds of things. Talk about that a little
Well,
bit.
I still can't get used to this. What's the Iowa conference called? The American Rivers Conference or something
Sure,
like that?
let's go with that.
Yeah, there have been a lot of changes. I'm thinking about maybe doing a story this spring. I think it was about 30 years ago the State High School Association dropped the pole vault from Iowa track meets. And somebody's out there, and I think he's from Bettendorf, so he'll have the state high school record forever because they've gotten rid of the thing. Yeah, the high school football certainly changing. It used to be conference play, now it's district play. I think that takes away from some of the great rivalries we used to have. The facilities are better. Geez, a lot of the high schools have the artificial turf fields now, really, really well done, and things like that. I'm trying to think, maybe someone else can suggest some changes that happen in high school sports. I still, I think the crowds are getting smaller in some places. I hear that more girls are playing volleyball than basketball now, which is kind of alarming to some of the girls' basketball coaches. Things are changing. I see fewer and fewer kids going out for football, and I think we all know what's happening there. And I love football. It's my favorite sport growing up playing. I love covering it. But there's some things about it that obviously are problematic, and it may go away sooner than we know. I don't know. They're making rules. They're trying to save it. We'll see what happens.
Well, and I feel like there's been, since I was in high school, some growth in soccer. Maybe as an alternative to football on the boys' side, right?
Yeah.
Like,
It didn't exist. Soccer didn't exist as a high school sport when we started here in '79, but it has grown. It's big, and I think it'll just get bigger. You know. But a lot of these sports like soccer, and I mentioned volleyball for the girls. I mean, they have all these club sports, and they want these kids out for these club sports year round.
Right.
And that's tough on, I think, some of the high school coaches. I mean, you see a great kid here, he's a basketball player, but you like him on the track team or something. I got to play AU basketball year round, you know. And so that's something I think the high schools are battling a little bit. I remember my son brought up the name Ryan Sweeney the other day, a great baseball player from our area. And, you know, he started playing at Jefferson, and he told them he needed to go to these pro showcases, and he wanted to play, AAU or whatever they called the baseball. And Jeff said, no, Jefferson High School said, no, we want you committed here. And he said, well, I can't do that. Well, Xavier said, we'll take you anytime you want to play. So he transferred to Xavier, and, you know, was an outstanding baseball player, but they let him do the other things that were part of his development. And that's the way it worked out.
Another sport I happen to know is growing in the area is bowling. My children are varsity bowlers. My son currently holds the highest average in Washington high school history.
I did a story on a wash bowler once. He bowled right-handed and left-handed.
There you go. I tell you what.
I don't think I was your son, though.
No, it wasn't. But I did want to say thank you, because KCRG really covers bowling like it's a sport. You know why? Because it's a sport. That's your commercial for today.
It's a great opportunity, though, for kids who may not play basketball and football, but they bowl. Why not? You know,
Absolutely.
it's great.
Absolutely.
Great.
I mean, and you know, Brian's at Wichita State because it's the #1 bowling program in the country, right?
Yeah.
And so it really is a.
We've had athletes. We've had quite a few athletes of the week who are bowlers.
Yeah.
And good stories.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So here among the many differences between John and myself, here's a big one. I believe the good Lord invented the outdoors to remind us how nice it is inside. I mean, really, pretty nice in here tonight, isn't it? John, on the other hand, he could leave to go outside at any moment. So I want to talk about the various kinds of outdoor coverage that you have done over the years. Before we get to sort of the most legendary of them all, why don't we start with RAGBRAI?
Sure.
Yeah.
RAGBRAI.
And the first time you suggested that you might want to go out on RAGBRAI, the station's response to that was?
No. It was kind of interesting. I grew up in Iowa, and although RAGBRAI wasn't here when I was growing up, I was very aware of it because Mom always sent me the newspaper clippings. But so I was very aware. When I got back here, I ran a lot. My wife and I both were runners back then, and she still is. And I was in shape, and I really wanted to try RAGBRAI. And as you mentioned, I went to the station management and asked them if I could do it and report on it, and they said no. And I said, man, why not? They said, it's a Des Moines Register. And you are owned by the Cedar Rapids Gazette, and you are not going out there and promoting that event. Well, I don't know, in the early 90s, all of a sudden everything changed, and about 2 weeks before RAGBRAI started, the news director came to me and said, John, would you be willing to ride RAGBRAI for us? I said, wow. And I said, sure. And, like I say, I hadn't been riding a bike, but I was in shape and climbed on my bike for a couple of weeks and went out. I think that was 1994. And I did 17 RAGBRAIs after that. But I love being out on the road. I love riding early. It was such a great way to see the state. Boy, this is a beautiful state. And you get up and start riding your bike at 5:30, 6 in the morning. The sun's coming up. It is beautiful. And then, like you say, it's obviously outdoors, and you deal with different weather things. We had the famous saggy Thursday going into Sigourney one year when it was 30-mile-an-hour headwinds the whole way, and it was tough. And the funny thing was, I brought that story out of the morgue, so to speak. And because Scott rode in there this year, he's riding RAGBRAI for us now, and they had a ride to Sigourney. We broke that story out, and and updated it and remembered how bad Saggy Thursday was. But RAGBRAI, you know, is really to this day, I still have people ask me, John, are you going to ride RAGBRAI this year? And I haven't ridden it for a couple of years. And, you know, I never know if I'll get back out there, but it was an absolutely great experience. And you wouldn't like it because usually you're outside in a tent camping, things like that. It's raining. I got to tell you another story about RAGBRAI. I can tell you a lot of stories about RAGBRAI. But as you ride into towns, there are always these signs along the side, you know, stop at the high school for a free spaghetti meal. Stop here, stop there. One time there was a sign, stop at the Methodist Church, you know, hamburgers, popcorn, and kaibos. I don't know if you know what a kaibo is, but it's a porta potty. My wife was a rookie rider. She didn't know what kaibo was. So she goes to the Methodist Church in this town and says, and the guy says, what would you like? She says, I'll take a kaibo with everything on it. Live and learn, right?
Is she your ride home?
Yeah.
You may get to experience the great outdoors yet tonight. Whew. So I've been thinking that maybe you'll get to go back out on RAGBRAI because Sable got lost this year.
Yeah, he tends to get lost, but that guy, he goes hard. I really like the way he rides. He might be riding his bike tonight at 11 o'clock at night. I don't know.
Yeah, but there are thousands of people on this ride, and somehow
He gets
Scott
lost, yeah.
loses all of them.
Yeah. Well, I think one of his problems, he starts so darn early in the morning, there aren't too many out in front of him. And,
that is not a problem I would have.
yeah.
So you were also telling us when we talked before that one of the challenges is that by the time you ride into town, while everyone's getting their kaibos with everything,
Yes.
You had work to do.
Yes, and that's one reason I like to start early in the morning. One reason, because the kaibos are fresh when you get to them.
Right.
But anyway, so, you know, you have to get into town by noon or 1 o'clock because now you've got to go do some editing. And, you know, in the early days, we started this before we had cell phones. I don't know how we communicated because the photographer would be 30 miles this way and I'd be this way. And over the years, I learned that I was passing up a lot of good stories because I didn't have a camera with me. So the small cameras came along and I started carrying a camera on the bike and I started doing stories, you know, while I was riding. And that really, I think, picked up our coverage a lot to be able to shoot the stories on the road instead of saying, we'll meet you at the post office in Cherokee at 10 o'clock. You know, if my photog and maybe a potential story I'd had or someone I'd seen on the road, we'll meet you at the library or we'll meet you at the first gas station on the left-hand side going into town and do the story. So that gave us a lot of flexibility and I really enjoyed it. But yeah, you got to get your work done because you got to feed it out. And just like I said, now with all the cell phones in town, sometimes that's difficult just communicating back and forth to the station. But yeah, RAGBRAI was a great deal, and I think people identified me with it. And you know, I had a bike. It was called Old Yeller. Yeah. It was a Schwinn from about 1970, 10-speed.
A question about Old Yeller came to mind, but I don't think I'll ask it.
Oh, okay.
I don't want any crying in the room. That would be.
But then the funny thing was that when my retirement, the station gave me a brand new bike, and I didn't ride it right away. But I did ride it the last two RAGBRAIs I rode on, and but you just meet great people out there, and yeah, you battle the elements, but that's part of the deal. That's part of the deal.
More power to you. We will get to John's failed retirement before we're done here, but in the meantime, before we go there, let's talk about, and before we talk about the fish, let's talk about the other sorts of outdoor stories. This is sort of your personality on the station, right? You are the outdoors guy. And sometimes you were telling us...
That's a compliment.
You were going... Is it?
Yes.
Noted. So sometimes you would go out without a story. You'd go out looking for a story. Is that right?
Sure. Sometimes you just get in the car and you drive up to the Mississippi, or you drive down the Sutliff Bridge, or you drive out to McBride, see if anybody's fishing on that 10 below degree day, and you join them and everything. And but other times they're all set up, you know. But the thing about an outdoor story is, yeah, we're going to start fishing at 6:30 in the morning, but we don't know what's going to happen. You know, I go to Kinnick Stadium. I know it's going to kick off at 11. I know it's going to end at 2. I know there's going to be some touchdowns, some interviews, this, that, and the other thing. But you go on an outdoor story and you never know what you're going to get. We're going to catch some fish, or we're going to see a turkey, or we're going to hear turkeys, things like that. So sometimes the story is about a celebrity that's doing the hunting. Sometimes it's about the dog you're following, chasing pheasants. Dog stories are always popular. But when I moved to Green Bay, I was a football, baseball, basketball guy. I think like most sportscasters. And up there, Big Al Sampson and Chuck Ramsey were sportscasters, and they were doing outdoor stories. They were doing fishing stories and hunting stories. And that's kind of neat. And so I learned up there how to do them. And then when I came down here, I brought it with me and just started doing them. And when I go out in public, I hear more about that than anything else. Hey, John, I love the outdoor stories. I love that fishing piece. You know, I love your outdoor half-hour specials. Because that's something that I do that the other people in the market don't do. So that's a compliment to me, and it lets me stand out, because we all interview Kirk Ferentz. You know, we all interviewed the Iowa basketball players, and so, but doing the outdoor stories, and I've done a lot of them with former or current Hawkeye athletes and coaches, and that's been fun. And so the outdoors has kind of been one of my trademarks, and I treasure it, and I love going out and covering those kind of stories. Like sometimes we do celebrities and stuff, but usually it's just the average Joe guy, you know, and we go out and we have a ball. And they're usually pretty darn good with the microphone, because I think they've been watching those fishing shows so long. They know how to tell a good tale and everything. But,
You'll be shocked to learn that I have never appeared in one of these stories because I am at home. All right, it's time to talk about the largemouth bass in the room, big old fish.
Yeah.
You brought that from Green Bay.
Actually, we didn't. I am right about that one. I was sitting in the sports office one day, and I think it was the late '80s, and the news director came in and said, "I want you to start a new feature called Big Old Fish." And I said, "Well, we can do that. We can do that." I'm sure it wasn't his idea, and nothing's ever original, right? He saw it somewhere else. But first of all, I think I had the background by doing all the outdoor stories. This is something we could sell, you know,
sure.
we could do. And I said, yeah, we can get some promos going, have people send in fish pictures. And I said, we can probably get that going in about a month. He said, I'd like you to start next week. I said, oh.
Management, ladies and gentlemen, management.
So I said, next week, yeah, management. So, okay, so I didn't know what to do. So Fin and Feather was right up the road here on 3rd Avenue at the time. And I knew they had a bulletin board right by the cash register with pictures on it. So I went up and I knew the guys there. And I said, can I just borrow 5 of these pictures? And we did. So the first Big Old Fish was 5 pictures. And we put it on, and it just exploded. It was history. I mean, that was it. That's all I had to do. The first time people sent their pictures in, and we would show 5 on a Monday night. And then when email came along, oh, God.
A PSA, slow down with the fish photos.
Yeah, I mean, we got a hand over fist, and I'll tell you, you know, we get most of them June, July, August, September, and those people that send those in may not see their pictures till Christmas. I try to take them in the order I get them, and use them and everything. And right now, this is the time of the year when I'm closest to the thing. But I wanted to read you something I got about Big Old Fish.
Look at him, all prepared and
This is an email I got after I retired. That Big Old Fish song drives me bananas. By the way, I've had people over the years tell me their dog starts howling when the Big Old Fish theme song comes on. It used to be the Andy Griffith Show theme song. Then we had to change it because we ran out of the music rights but we got another one that sounds almost like it, and we've been using everything. Anyway, this guy writes, that Big Old Fish song drives me bananas. The whole thing is silly. What percentage of the audience wants to see fish held up? When you retired, I thought we were relieved of it. But no! You're still there. We have to put up with the world's silliest and most annoying song. I usually get it off by the 2nd or 3rd note. Maybe you could please really retire so we don't have to put up with the fish and the ducks, etc. in the outdoors. I do, however, wish you great enjoyment with fishing and hunting. But please stop subjecting us, the viewers as a whole, to it. Thank you. Now leave the station entirely and get out to the great outdoors to your heart's content. That's a real email I got. I always enjoyed that. Ha!
Wow, even my wife, who grew up in St. Louis and is a harsh critic of local news, she loves big old fish. Now, leaf line 9 she can do without, but big old fish,
Yeah.
Everyone loves big old fish.
And I get more, when I go out, people say, hey, I love big old fish. Hey, I was on your big old fish 20 years ago. Hey, you had my grandson on last week. So I think I always say, especially when I retired, if the pictures stop coming in, that's fine with me. We'll just stop. But it doesn't seem to be the case. It's about as old-time TV as you can get, showing pictures
Right.
of pictures. In the old days, when they mailed them in, we always, I called them and we'd mail the picture back to them, and we always sent a bumper sticker that says, I'm hooked on John's big old fish. Now that they email them in, there's no address, no way to send them back, so we don't do that much anymore. We still get a few quote-unquote hard copy pictures, and we use them. But once again, try to show them the order I get them. I think that's about the fairest way to do it. Now, if the general manager sends a picture of his kid with a fish,
That gets bumped up?
they'll probably get bumped up just a little bit.
I know that guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. You replaced a bumper sticker recently, right? Someone wrote in and needed a new bumper sticker.
Yes, well, I've done that, but yes, that's right. Now, see, this lady called in and said, my son had this bumper sticker. It was his pride and joy. He had it on his bulletin board, and one day it fell off and the dog ate it. Could you please send me another one? So I sent her 2. So
A backup bumper sticker.
a backup bumper sticker.
I like it. All right, we're going to transition from fish to another water-based story, arguably the biggest story of John's career, and not about sports at all. Let's talk about the flood of 2008. Did you know there was a flood in 2008? There was, and you were up in the air.
Yes.
And on the front lines. Tell us about that experience.
Well, when the flood came around in 2008, everybody at the station it was really neat. We all pulled together. At one time, the authorities wanted us to shut the station down because the floodwaters were getting too close, and we said, no, we're staying on the air, and we did. And it was, and someone pointed out to me, John, you did sports all your life, but the biggest story you ever covered was probably the flood, and I would have to agree with them on that. And in the early days of the flood, it hit up north, and I went up to Vinton one day in my car just to try to find a story, and it was raining, and I drove into this Casey's, probably to get a fried pie or something, I don't know. But this guy had a boat out, and he had his boat and his trailer, and he said, John, you want to go on the river? I said, yeah, I'll do that. So we went down, we got on the river with him, and it was really high. Here we go again. Working. So the river was really high, and we went up and down the river, and he said, I want to show you something. And we were on the water, and we went up to this farmhouse, which the water was probably 10 feet up on the house. And there was this second floor porch deck, and all these cattle were on it, these cows were on it, trying to stay out of the water. And I'm rolling the camera, and he's driving the boat closer. We're getting a lot closer, and all of a sudden he says, John, they're never going to make it. Yeah. That line made my story. They're never going to make it. That was the emotion of it. I think people don't like seeing animals in danger, and that was it. And so actually, we went back a year later to update that story, and they did make it. They did make it because the farmer in question brought hay out to them and threw it on the deck, and the water never got a whole lot higher, and so they made it. But that one little quote, "They're never going to make it," kind of made that story. But anyway, but once the flood really got to Cedar Rapids, then my assignment, like you mentioned, was up in the air. I flew in the helicopter out of Marion. Newscopter 9 was gone by then, which was unfortunate because Captain Bobby could have done a bang-up job because he could go live and he could do great reports. But we had gotten rid of Newscopter 9 by that time, pretty much just an economic type decision. And so my role was to shoot video out of the helicopter, and to do that, I kind of had to hang one leg outside, outside the helicopter so I could get good angles and everything. And it was really something. I remember seeing the Czech and Slovak Museum so much. I remember seeing those the houseboats up against the railroad trestle there on the thing, and it was quite an experience to shoot that video and then go down and lots of times I'd get on the set with Bruce and Beth. And what a great job they did. Everybody at the station did a great job, and we'd talk about the video we had just shot. And one of the things was, we went up, the first time I went up with this pilot, and I'm trying to think of his name, it was out at Perry Young, I think was his name, out at the Marion Airport, and right before we took off, he took his pen out and wrote something on his hand. I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "We can only stay up for 1 hour," so I'm writing down what time it is. The other thing I want to tell you, John, he says, is I hate flying over water. I said, good, we're here to cover the flood. But that was quite an experience. Can I tell you another helicopter story?
Yeah, absolutely.
And this kind of has to do with RAGBRAI. One year we were going to be riding into Marshalltown. And the plan was, I talked about the live trucks, that you had to have a high hill to get a shot back to Cedar Rapids. Well, Marshalltown was too far. We couldn't get a live shot out of Marshalltown. So the plan was we were going to have the live truck at the Tama Toledo area. There's a real high area there where we could get a live shot back to the station. So the plan was John's going to ride his bike to Marshalltown, 70, 80 miles, whatever it was, meet a photographer at the Roundhouse, which is the high school basketball arena, and we'll drive out to the live truck in Tama and do our live shot. That's the plan, okay? The night before we ride into Marshalltown, I had this terrible dream about a helicopter crashing. And it's burning and it's bad. It bothered me, but I didn't think much about it. The next day I'm riding into Marshalltown. And I get to Marshalltown thinking, we're going to go over to Tama, and kind of had my plans, what we're going to do. And I get to the Roundhouse, and Matthew Cohey, the photog, says, "Hey, John, change of plans." I said, "What?" He says, "You're going up in the helicopter." I did not like that, but everything went fine. Everything went fine, but it was ironic to have that dream the night before. But Captain Bobby was a great pilot, and I enjoyed being with him.
Isn't it weird how that story was suspenseful, even though he's sitting right here now? Well done. That's well done. I just want to mention for the record that had I been in the boat when the cows were up on the deck, I would have said, "Oh, look, the cows came home." And it would have been a whole different story and not nearly as successful. Again, another reason why I stay home.
You know, another thing about the helicopter that I should mention, that it was a great news gathering tool for us, and everybody knew who had Newscopter 9, and that's kind of where we got the idea of Friday Night Lights, because he could shoot up above and get the great stadium shots, and it was just a great tool. But the station had a policy, and I think I respect them. If you didn't want to fly in Newscopter 9, you did not have to fly in Newscopter 9. And I think that was a good policy, because there's some people that just wouldn't want to go up, because there wasn't much to that plane, believe me. A few rubber bands, and there wasn't a lot to it.
All right, so we've been talking a little bit about Captain Bobby. We should talk about some of your other co-workers over the years. We should talk about Bruce's mustache. There are all kinds of things we should talk about. But let's start with Bob Brooks.
Oh, Brooksy, yeah. He was my predecessor, and everybody knows who Brooksy was, and he was a great guy. And when I first moved to town, I was a little concerned. I didn't know how he might treat me, the fact that he'd been at KCRG so many years. And one thing, luckily, there'd been 4 or 5 guys between Brooksy and when I arrived at Channel 9. But Brooksy was always very nice to me, never tried to big time me. God, he told such great stories. And he came back and actually worked with us on a part-time basis later on, and I really cherished those days. They'd always ask him, "Can we get a mic check, Bob?" And he'd go, "Wolf 0, Wolf 0." But he had great stories, and he could tell them. And he also had part of a lunch club over here at the Starlight on Mondays. And after I retired, he said, "John, why don't you come on over and join us?" And I thought that was very nice of him to do that, and I did, and we all just waited for Brooksy to show up to share a few tales with us and everything, and he would, and we were all privileged, I think, to to have a guy like that on our airwaves, have a guy like Ron Gonder on our airwaves so many years. It's pretty good deal to have guys like that doing our sports. And I always looked up to them, and I did stories on all those guys over the years because I thought they were institutions because they're very public figures and everybody knew where they were.
You'll note that that was John's second impression of the night, and the only impression of Bob Brooks I have ever heard that did not include the words, "How you doing, everybody?" All right, so I joke about Bruce's mustache, but you have a good story about facial hair at the studio.
Well, one year, this was in the early 80s, before Bruce had arrived, and our general manager, the Des Moines Register used to have a TV section, and they always had usually a local featured story every week. They actually did one on me one time, but which I think I was quoted as saying I'd never wear a trench coat as a reporter. You know, trench coats. So I'd never wear a trench coat. But anyway, the general manager was quoted as saying, "We don't allow our on-air people to have facial hair." This is in the Register. Well, it just happened to be that our weekend anchor and our weekend sports anchor both had mustaches, facial hair. So they didn't take very kind to that this guy apparently hadn't even noticed that his weekend anchors had mustaches. So in protest, they shaved them off. Well, now the general manager found out kind of what had happened, you know, the back and forth. Now he gets a little upset, and he tells them never to grow them back. So it was kind of an interesting time right then.
Interesting, because I really do think that Bruce Auney's mustache is, talk about institutions, that thing was more popular than Bruce himself for a while. Like, I think there was mourning in the streets when he shaved it off.
Yeah, it was a big change. There's no doubt about it. No doubt about it. I don't know if I'm so used to seeing him now without a mustache that it's hard to go back. But anytime you pull a file video of Bruce, there he is, you know, with the mustache. That was just part of his persona. And he looked good. Well, Bruce looks good in anything.
That's true.
He looked good in that, and he shaved it off and looks good now. So you bet.
Well, let me ask you this very pointed question. Scott Sable, what's up with that guy?
He's a great guy. Scott and I worked together for a long, long time. We still work together, so to speak. And, you know, everybody thinks he's crazy, but he's not. He's not as crazy as you think. He's pretty serious about getting the Sportscast on the air, about working hard to get it on the air. He never missed a deadline. He's passionate, yes. He never missed a deadline for me. You know, he'd be out in the field. Sometimes maybe not the greatest communications back and forth, but by gosh, when they said, "You're on," he was there live from a football game or a bowl game or something like that. And he does a great job. He has the Golden Klutz. I think on Sunday nights it was very popular because he anchored the cast. We had a news anchor, Gerald. What was his name, Terry? Gerald Resnick was our news anchor. I don't think Gerald realized that Scott Sable made him, because Scott would make fun of him during the Golden Klutz things. They do all kinds of crazy things, and I think it made Gerald famous at the time. But and he does Athlete of the Week. You know, he really has embraced Athlete of the Week. He does. We do about 30 to 33 of those a year, and he does virtually all of them. I mean, he in other words, he doesn't miss a Thursday. And I think the kids, he has a kind of a formula. You know, there's kind of a formula to, but the kids really enjoy them. And we have a banquet in May, and I think the kids enjoy the challenge. I wanted to relate one story, because one time one of the winners was a National Merit Scholar. Means he's pretty smart, right? So Scott thought this time, instead of a physical challenge, he'd give him kind of a college quiz. So we got out encyclopedias and dictionaries. You remember what those are? We got 5.
Communicated via fax.
Yeah. So we drew up 5 questions to ask this kid, you know, as part of the challenge. So Scott was all pumped, and he and the photog lead. I think the kid was from North Linn. So they pump, they drive off, and the minute they get away, I pick up the phone and call the basketball coach or whoever it was. I said, "Coach, Scott's going to come with these 5 questions. Here are the answers." So I think it was a Thursday night, and I think I was down in Iowa City, and I had to go down and cover an Iowa game that night. So we get back, and about 10:30, 11 o'clock, Scott's still in the office. I said, how'd Athlete of the Week go? He said, God, that kid knew every answer. I said, he did? I'll be darned. We were not going to tell Scott about that until the Athlete of the Week banquet in May, but somehow it got out, and when it did, we all laughed. He thought it was funny too, but I always thought that was a little different.
Well, I feel like Bruce has settled into his role as straight man for both Scott and for Beth. He's got Abbott and Costello going in both directions. Does he like being the straight man?
Oh, I think he does. Yeah, I think he does. Bruce is I was telling my wife, if you ever come out of a sportscast and if Bruce or Beth comment on a story they just saw, that makes so much difference, I think. You know, it tells you that they were watching, that they thought it was a good story, an interesting story, a funny story, a sad story, whatever it might be. Sometimes in our business, though, we get so hung up on God, we got to get that final forecast in. We've only seen weather 4 times already in the half hour. But we got to get that final forecast in. Hit it, Joe, you know. And so sometimes I'll just come right out of a sports feature, go right into a weather graphic, and I kind of lose my mind at home sometimes. But I also understand what they do, and I understand how important weather is, and I understand what a great job Joe and the guys do. And so he and I kid back and forth, but that's just a comment I made. That Bruce and Beth, what they think about something and what they say about it on the air can really go a long way to selling a story, I think. And I appreciate it when they do say something. And Bruce is a great news guy. I mean, he's the kind of guy that wants his T's crossed and I's dotted. He wants it right. And he stresses that in the newsroom. And I respect him for that. He wants it right, and he wants the words to be right, and he wants the details to be right, and that's what we're about in the news business. We should be correct. We make mistakes, but boy, he does his best to make sure that things are correct, and I appreciate that.
Okay, I promise I'm going to let you ask questions in just a moment, but we've nodded a couple of times to John's failed attempt to retire. For a retired guy, he's on the air a lot. A lot. So tell us
Don't you like that, Rob, or what?
Yes, I do, because otherwise I got to put up with that Scott character. So tell me about your approach to retirement, John.
Well, when I retired in December of 2012, and it was a difficult decision for me at the time because luckily I still have my health and everything. I still enjoyed what I was doing. The technology was starting to catch up with me a little bit. And some other things about the business were starting to catch up with me. And so including our retirement financial program was catching up with me. So I made the decision to get out, and I wasn't quite sure what we were going to do, but they made the offer to me at the time that, if you want to stay involved a little bit, let's see what we can work out. And one thing that was going to keep going was Big Old Fish. I always said they couldn't fire me because Big Old Fish was still there. So and so we go with Big Old Fish. And then I just, after 3 or 4 weeks of being away, I realized that I needed to be doing something. I don't have a lot of hobbies. And so we started coming in and doing the outdoor stories more than anything else. And when they need a body, they'll call me. Scott needed somebody to go to the girls' state basketball tournament yesterday. He called me, and I said, great, I'd love to go. And I still go with that. And I help them Friday Night Lights. And just do a lot of different things. Then I do stories that I want to do, which is kind of nice. And I can say no if they ever ask me to go do something. And I do that very infrequently, hopefully, but I try to help the guys out. I'm the guy at the station who knows where all the file video is. I had put to be honest, I had put something together on Brooksy because he was getting old and he was having some health problems, and so the day he died, we had something to go, ready to go, and I had time to work on it, and I've done things like that in the past, and I enjoy going through the file video. You mentioned the thing we did on 100 years of the girls basketball tournament. It wasn't my greatest piece by any means, but you know, I enjoyed going back and finding some of the video that would help enhance the story and everything. So yeah, I still work on. I'm not an employee at Channel 9. I'm a freelance guy, but I'm very blessed that they allow me to do it. Very blessed. My wife isn't quite so sure about that, but I'm very blessed. And the day they tell me they don't want me or can't afford me, although I'm not pretty cheap, I will understand that too. But you know, I was blessed to work. We're owned by Great TV, but I was blessed to work there when we were owned by the Gazette. Not many TV stations are locally owned. I can guarantee you that. They're part of big corporations. And the guy who fires you is living in New York City or San Francisco. You don't know who he is. And so I was very blessed to be owned locally, to have the support of the Gazette people most of the time. And I count that among my blessings when I moved down here from Green Bay to take the job at KCRG.
Okay, now unlike a news producer, I have not been keeping track of time at all. But I do want to give you some time to ask questions of your own.
It is.
Yes.
We are pretty long here. Go ahead.
I just want to give you one great compliment. Do you remember when the Rough Riders won the Clark Cup?
Absolutely.
And you were covering it, and how many years ago? My grandson's 18 now. How many years ago was that?
I would guess it was maybe 15 years ago. I don't know. Yeah.
Before he was even in school, he was a big hockey fan, because his dad was. And we went to the Rough Riders hockey games and knew Bill Axtell's family. And we went down there, and he was wandering around. He, you know, little like this, and here were these big hockey players and that big Clark Cup and everything like that. And somehow you got him on your news broadcast.
Okay, great.
And I said, I ran into you a couple of Rough Rider games later, and I said, hey, John, how can I get that video that you took of Coy when he was at the Clark Cup thing? And you said, bring me a tape. And I took it down and left it at KCRG, and a couple of days later I got the call, and I just saw it on my shelf the other day.
Oh,
and
great.
I really appreciate how kind you were.
Well, I'm glad we could help you out. That's great. Yeah, thank you.
And I don't mind the music, but I hate being reminded every Monday that that's John's big old fish. Why do I hear that?
I don't know. It's just that's
It
that.
seems like I don't hear other things, but man, when John's big old fish on Monday comes on, I hear that.
Good.
Way in the back.
Yeah, way in the back. This guy could be dangerous.
Yeah, we do go way back.
Yes.
I've always been kind of curious that coaches, all the coaches you've covered collegiately and so forth, we've heard lots of Hayden Fry stories, but of competing coaches, who are one or two of the most interesting you interviewed or look forward to coming to a game to do battle with Iowa or Iowa State?
Well, I didn't look forward to coming to it, but Bobby, the Indiana basketball coach, Bobby Knight, very intimidating. I did not look forward to it. Very interesting. I liked the old Michigan State coach. Help me out, huh? Judd Heathcote. He was a riot to be around. He would be funny. The Purdue football coach, we'd see him at Big Ten days. The guy, the cowboy. This is here's my memory. You know, myself. Tillerson or what? Huh?
Yes.
Was it that name, Tillerson? Joe Tillerson? Yeah. So some of the local high school coaches have been fun too. The guy at West Branch, Still Butch, he's kind of funny. I enjoy being around him. And the more you're around those guys, sometimes they seem gruff and intimidating, but sometimes they're really the fun guys to be around. And I think you kind of gain a little bit of respect for them along the lines. Yeah, Bill, those are just a few. I mean, there's been a lot around. I will say maybe the most charismatic guy I've ever been around, and he wasn't the coach, was Magic Johnson. I was around him a couple times. I was around Joe Namath a couple times. And you just being close to him. There's so much charisma to those guys, and you understood why they were successful at what they did. So kind of fun. Yes?
How about Vince Lombardi or Bart Starr, or was that too far back?
No, Vince is too far back. I never met Vince. He was in Washington, D.C. when I arrived at WBAY in Green Bay in 1970. But I learned something not you bring his name up, I learned something very valuable. Remember, he was sick in Washington, D.C. He had cancer. And I saw the sports director at my Green Bay station. He and a salesman who was really good at photography, they put together a half-hour special. They were ready. They were ready because they, it was a matter of time. And I think they're 4 months, 5 months in advance. But I really learned something for that, because when I could see that Hayden Fry was not in good health and I could see that his career was winding down, I put together a half-hour show. And we had it on that night. He announced his retirement, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. At 6:30, we had that half-hour special on. And that's only because I learned from Green Bay. So Vincent, Bart Starr I did know, and he was the football coach when I was covering Green Bay in the 1970s. And I went to the Pro Football Hall of Fame when he was inducted in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, along with Forrest Gregg. So very interesting guy. He was, he probably wasn't ready to be a head coach in the NFL, but very interesting guy, and I counted among my real privileges to have known Bart and really gotten to know all those guys who played on the great teams in the 1960s. They weren't playing anymore when I was up there, but they would come back and I'd get a chance to meet them. And I mean, my idol was a guy named Jim Taylor, who just died recently. And I got a chance to meet a guy like that. So, yeah. Is there anything else? I know we've gone awfully long.
We had a question here.
Who owns Buddy Rowe? I got caught fish.
I don't know who Buddy Rowe was. I thought I heard my wife say it, and I just kind of picked it up. And you're not the first person who's asked me that, but I try not to say it every week. But boy, it's hard to change the terminology on big old fish. Whopper. It still takes 2 hands to handle a whopper.
And here's another fish.
Yeah, you got a firm lip lock on that thing. There are only so many ways you can say it.
Several very brief points.
Yes.
Thank you for saying athletes of the week as opposed to athlete of the weeks.
Yeah, I've heard that.
I
Yeah.
know. Thank you for the outdoor stuff because nobody else does it. Thank you for the flood coverage. That was amazing, and you were a huge part of it. You know that. But
Well, thank you.
Here again. And thank you for still being the best storyteller on the air anywhere.
All right.
You're very kind. Thank you. You made my day. Thank you.
I'm going to jump in with our final question. If you were talking to a young sportscaster today, perhaps someone down at the University of Iowa working at DITV or whatever it might be, what sort of advice would you give them now?
I would say want to be a reporter. Don't just say I want to be on TV. I want to be a reporter. Learn the skills of reporting, and then learn the things I haven't learned. Learn about all this social media and the Twitter and the Facebook and all the technology, and learn how to use a camera, and be open-minded, and learn good grammar, learn how to write, learn that it's fleeting, and I see why. I mean, we're texting now. We don't use full words, full sentences. Spelling seems to be, not important anymore. So those are some things I think a reporter needs to do. And if you want to see good reporting, TV reporting, watch the CBS Evening News at 5:30. I really think that's the best. That's what I watch, and I really respect what they do.
We will not be sharing that publicly. The CBS News. Do you know where you work?
National. I'm talking national.
I know you are, but
At
still.
5, you're a 9. At 6, you're a 9.
I see.
Just remember.
Okay, so you cut away in between.
Just remember, no matter how you add 2 and 7, they never equal Channel 9. And if it happened today, it's news to us.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much. Thank you.